Hi everyone, Cameroni here again with an update on Cold Infusion Stormweaver. Not just cold, but I'm doing cold. But a lot of this applies to infusions in general and whatever skills you want to run with. I'm just a big fan of cold skills, so that's what I'm doing. I'll put up my TLDR and the notepad here. Pull this over to this monitor. Feel free to screenshot this, do whatever you want with it. I will go over some keynotes in the TLDR real quick. Your main combo for trash mobs is Ice Nova and a Snap. At level 50 plus, you can also clear trash using Eye of Winter with the new buffs slash nerfs. It's really good for clearing trash. Has a long cooldown, so alternating between that and Ice Nova slash Snap is the way that I've been doing it, since Snap also has a decently long cooldown. So between packs, I'll alternate between the two. Your main combo for bosses and tanky rares is Frost Bomb into Elemental Weakness, into Flame Wall, into Eye of Winter, and then you spam Frost Darts. Really early on, you can use Orb of Storms as well as Frost Bomb to get more infusions and a little bit more damage. I did that before I got my second lab done. You also use Ice Nova instead of Eye of Winter if you need to apply a chill, but usually you keep the chill going pretty well with just spamming Frost Bomb. For Ascendancy, I went with both infusion nodes. Get rid of the TLDR here. So I went with both of these nodes, Storm's Recollection and Refracted Infusion. It helps an incredible amount on bosses, which is where almost every build struggles early on in a league and early on in a build. You get a ton of infusions this way, because remnants count as infusions. Or I guess I should say infusions are remnants. And also, along with mana remnants, you don't have mana problems on bosses. Really good. This is so that you can just pick up cold infusions and get all of the other infusions that you need. I think it's better than the 15% cast speed you get from this. We're not shocking a ton, so this doesn't matter very much, and we apply maximum chill all the time. I don't think having 2 chills is going to matter too much, so we don't really need this either. So these are the best two in my opinion. Feel free to argue with me. I would love to debate. Fire infusions aren't super important early on. Once we get cast on Ilmet Comet, that's when those will start getting used, but until then, I don't really have a use for them, so they just stack up. One other quick thing for the TLDR, Rising Tempest is overpowered. It's so strong. For 4 seconds after using Snap or Elemental Weakness, because both of them count as Lightning, Cold, and Fire skills, you get 36% more damage on anything that you use for 4 seconds. Recently, 4 seconds. So 36% more elemental damage. Incredibly strong. It's like Considered Casting, I think is the name of the other support that gets 35% more damage, but without the minus 15% cast speed penalty. So highly recommend if you're doing Stormweaver, if you're using Snap or Elemental Weakness. Really strong. Now, onto the more lengthy explanations. Start with the skill combos and why, and I'll also get a nice showcase playing in the background of me just running through a random area in Act 5.1. Frost Arts is a pretty mediocre skill on its own if you're just using Frost Arts. That might change in the late game when you can scale things a lot higher. I've only made it to Act 5.1 so far since I've been playing with friends and spending some time with a family member who was in the ER over League Start. So it's been slower, and we've also just been having a blast going through the campaign. Just a quick note here. I think GGG absolutely nailed the campaign in Path of Exile 2. It is so fun to play through. It's kind of a chore and a slog if you need to run through it multiple times. I get it, because it's longer. But if you haven't played it in a while, which I haven't, and you're playing with friends, it's an absolute treasure. It does make you incredibly irate at times when you die to bosses multiple times with your friends because the enemy scaling is insane, but you put your heads together and you figure it out. It's fun. I've had a blast. Back to the meat of everything and the longer explanations. Back to Frost Art. Where this skill really shines is when you boost it with all of the other skills that I have listed here. So Frost Art, the DPS here, the basics, is it does projectile damage. You boost that projectile damage with Flame Wall. You send it through Flame Wall. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So Flame Wall adds projectile damage. So it adds 21 to 32 fire damage. Yeah, here's what I'm looking for. So 21 to 32 added fire damage and 3 to 50 added lightning damage. That gets added to each Frost Darts projectile, which is good because Frost Darts, if you look here, has really low flat damage. So you're basically doubling the flat damage on your Frost Darts just by sending it through Flame Wall. That, in turn, when you hit a chilled enemy, it does ice chunks. And if it's infused, it also explodes and creates more ice chunks. All of your ice chunks, if the projectile passes through a flame wall, every single one of these ice chunks, they don't need to pass through a flame wall. They're already infused with extra damage from the flame wall. So you get the 53 to 80 cold damage, plus whatever you get from flame wall on all of these ice chunks, which can all shotgun whatever you're hitting. You get 2 ice chunks for this, and you get 3 ice chunks after the explosion goes off, so for a total of 5 ice chunks from each projectile. And we're sending 5 projectiles since we're using multi-shot. So the damage starts adding up pretty quick just from Flame Wall. On top of all of that, it doesn't get boosted by Flame Wall. There's also the Explosion, which also does good damage. And also does AoE damage. Just a nice little thing on top of all of the rest. Grabbing plus projectiles on the skill tree. This is something I'm testing. Multi-shot doesn't seem to do it, but I think these interact with the chunks, because these chunks technically count as projectiles. I know it doesn't say it anywhere in Frost Arts, but they get infused by the flame wall, which means that they should be projectiles. As far as I can tell, I could be wrong. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. And since this is just a chance for spell skills to fire 2 additional projectiles, it's hard to tell if the ice chunks, if there's more ice chunks because it's firing more Frost Darts, or if there's more frost chunks because they're spawning because of these additional spell projectile nodes. I don't think it's spawning extra ice chunks, but there are some times where I see an incredible number of ice chunks. I know it happens if I hit a mob and it instantly dies with infused Frost Darts, so then the explosions instantly go off along with all of the normal ice chunks that we're going to blow off of it. So instead of the 2 ice chunks, explosion, 3 ice chunks, it's just 5 ice chunks plus an explosion immediately on the mob for each projectile. But sometimes I see a crazy number of ice chunks coming off, so if anyone can determine if this affects that, that'd be hugely helpful. I keep watching videos of me doing Frost Darts in slow motion, seeing if I can catch it. The projectiles are so hard to see and figure out how many actual projectiles there are that I haven't gotten definitive evidence on camera yet. So I'll keep looking. If anyone knows the answer, I'd love to know it. Another thing, since I think I'm like 80% sure that these chunks count as projectiles, reducing their projectile speed here on the passive tree seems to make the ice chunks travel less distance. So it shotguns harder. That's another thing that's hard to test. I have a ton of more testing to do for Frost Darts still. I've mostly just been playing around and having a good time. But that seems to shotgun harder now that I've slowed down the projectile speed. If anyone knows the answer to that, again, I'd love to know. Here's a clip of what I'm talking about with Flame Wall, about how the chunks get infused if the initial projectile just passes through the flame wall, and then I'll get back to the showcase. So flame wall plus frost darts, that's cool and all, but on its own it's still not enough to compete with other skills for single target DPS. That's where exposure and elemental weakness come in. Frost Bomb inflicts a high amount of exposure. It's less on bosses. It got nerfed on bosses this league. Same with curses, they also got nerfed on bosses, but it's still a decent amount. On most bosses I get, between the two, a combined total of somewhere between 50 and 60 reduced resistances, which is just 50 to 60% increased damage that the enemy takes, which is awesome. So that plus everything else seems to do a pretty good job of chunking the bosses, which we should be getting to in the showcase here shortly. See a boss fight where I do the combo, and it's over pretty quick. I don't really need to go into too much detail on the trash clearing. You cast Ice Nova, and then you snap them when they're frozen. And then you have 100% uptime on all your infusions, because there's infusions all over the place. This is especially helpful when you're building a big stockpile of infusions for frost arts and boss fights that have adds, or scary abyss rares and bosses. You stack up a bunch of infusions in the abyss when the scary rare mobs come out, or the boss if there's a boss. You do the combo, and there are ice infusions everywhere, so they're just getting machine gunned and constantly exploding, and they die pretty quick. So later on, this is looking to be an incredible abyss farmer. Single target without ads is not nearly as good as a lot of other things you can do in this game, but it's not bad. I've made it workable. As far as siphon elements go, it's pretty meh. I'm using it just because I don't have cast on ailment yet, since, like I said, I'm still only in Act 5.1. Soon I will have cast on ailments, but not yet. Since Frost Art doesn't really build up freeze, which concerns me for cast on ailment as well, but that's whatever. We'll see. Like I said, for trash, we're mostly using Ice Nova anyway, so cast on ailment should proc a lot when we're just doing maps and clearing trash. Probably proc less on bosses, which is sad, but with the combo, our boss damage is pretty decent anyway. I don't know that we need cast on ailment for that. Anyway, back to siphon elements. So the skill itself has a 5% chance to spawn an infusion when you ignite a non-ignited enemy and shock a non-shocked enemy, and then 5% chance per power when you freeze an enemy. Unique enemies have 20 power, so if you freeze a unique enemy, there's a 100% chance that you're going to get a cold infusion. But it's just one cold infusion. It's doubled if you're using the infusion that appears twice. But it takes so much work to freeze a unique enemy in this, at least early. I don't really know that it's worth it. You get 2 just from Frost Bomb. You can also throw in like Orb of Storms or Living Bomb to spawn more if you're using the one where you have a 50% chance to get a random infusion when you pick up an infusion. So there's better ways to generate, and then you can snap the boss as well after you shock and ignite it. That will always generate a remnant. Or not a remnant. Well, yes, a remnant, but an infusion. So you'll always be getting fire and lightning infusions because you're always going to be freezing and igniting, or shocking and igniting the boss. And then you have a 50% chance to get another random infusion. So I think that is much better than Siphon Elements. Maybe Siphon Elements will be huge later on. I don't really know. But I'm not going to worry too much about it, at least in the early versions of my build. Once I'm super rich and can do a lot of testing, I'll do more. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. That's the TLDR on that. So my final spirit usage is going to be cast on ailment and mana remnants. Mana remnants is incredibly overpowered, as I'll be getting into when I talk about the passive tree. Moving on to the passive tree, there is a lot to explore and test in the passive tree. There's a lot of new things here. I'm certain that my setup is not the best or the most optimized, but it is doing the job I need it to do, and it's doing it pretty well. Ice Archon is incredible. You get 25% more cold damage. All your elemental damage is converted to cold, and you get more freeze buildup. I think it's like 100% more freeze buildup. It's a lot. I don't think it's worth building around, but it is nice when you have it, and it's just a few passive points to grab where we're at on the tree anyway. Additionally, the lightning damage and fire damage from Flame Wall when you're throwing tons of frost darts all get converted to cold as well, which is big if we're going to be increasing cold damage. Recovering life and mana. The 2 nodes, what are they called? Vigorous Remnants and Arcane Remnants. Grabbing those, I think it's mandatory, in my opinion. You can go for more or increased mana regen other places on the tree for just 5 passive points out of the way. You have remnants that can be collected from further away, which includes your infusions, and then also recovering 3% of your life and mana when you collect a remnant. If you use mana remnants, you're spawning a ton of mana remnants, and you're also picking up a ton of infusions, which count as remnants. So you're regenerating or recovering a lot of mana and life just from those 2 nodes. Highly recommend. That's the main reason I picked up Mana Remnants. Between the 2, I have not had any mana problems, and I rarely need to drink my mana potion. Incredibly good. And I haven't needed to get mana regen anywhere else on my passive tree or on any of my items. So it can save you a lot for affixes and a lot of passive points. Later on, if we stack mana, things could change. We'll see. But at least through the campaign and early maps, incredibly good. Everything else is, you can adjust it how you want. I think this is about as good as it's going to get for the early game on my passive tree. Feel free to throw nodes elsewhere, or if you have ideas on how it could be improved, I'd love to hear it. I've just sort of been going with the flow, so to speak. Moving on to items. Through the campaign and in the end game, you're looking for basic generic caster gear, either full ES or where we're at on the tree. We could also opt for evasion ES, and especially later with the changes to evasion where you can get deflection rating that is a percentage equal to your evasion rating. Deflection sounds like it will be really strong, especially when paired with energy shield. So that could be good, but that's going to be a much higher budget, I think. So early on, I'm just going to stack energy shield. It's kind of hard to recover energy shield early on. I'll figure it out. Might need to invest some passive points or some affixes and better energy shield generation. The most important things, though, on items in the campaign and early end game are resistances. You need to cap all of your resistances, and life. Life is much easier to recover in the campaign and early game than energy shield. So those are the big ones. And if you get extra energy shield, it's nice. Or if you get some armor and some evasion, that's also nice. But life is, that's the main thing you want, along with resistances. Offensive affixes that you want on items. The most important is plus to all skill gems or all spell skill gems. I'm also using a plus to all projectile skills on my amulet. Plus to all is better, but I'm just using what I got. After that comes cast speed in the late game. In the early game, you don't want cast speed as much if you can't sustain infusions very well. So you want increased damage, increased spell damage, damages extra elements over cast speed. But once you, probably about second lab, that's where you'll want to start speccing more into cast speed. Because at that point, you'll be able to sustain infusions, no problem. It for my early game Cold Infusion Stormweaver advice. I think it has come together pretty well. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to post in the comments below, or feel free to pop into my Twitch channel. I just started on Twitch. I'll also be talking in Discord with my homies while I'm on Twitch that I league started with. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have in there if you don't want to wait for me to reply to your comment on YouTube. Or if you want to just pop in and brainstorm ways to improve Stormweaver and Fusion tech, that is also more than welcome. I'll catch you all next time.